Hello, MotoAmerica fans. Welcome to this latest edition of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. I am Bice. You know, a lot of people think that's my first name, but it's actually Sean, just so you know.
They think your first name's Bice.
Yeah, they always go, people call me Bice because of this thing, I guess. And do they call you Carruthers?
Maybe. I don't know.
It's too hard to say Carruthers. And I'm joined by our communications manager, Paul Carruthers. We are at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, one of the best places on earth. And we're here with one of the best riders the U.S. has ever produced in Ben Spies, who is now a team manager of Rahal Ducati Moto. And I can't get enough of how well the team's going so far. I mean, Ben, you probably expected it because you have high expectations and a level of excellence that you like to achieve. But for me, I'm like, damn, they're brand new and look what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, first go back, I'd call myself the team mascot instead of team manager.
Okay.
It's a funny suit.
Yeah, but I mean, the main thing is, what I like to do with the team is work with the riders, try to get the most out of them. I always kind of go back to there's 10 pieces of a pie, and it's real easy with talent to get 6 or 7 of them together, 8 of them maybe. But to make everything come together, it takes more than usually just yourself. And I was lucky enough that I had a really good circle of people, behind me when I was coming up at that age. And, with Swans and Houseworth and the mechanics and just riders and a good, circle of people. So, just trying to work with the riders a little bit on helping them get faster or just helping them understand what's really going on with the bike when we're talking about feedback and making sure that gets translated to the mechanics, the crew chief, or the suspension guy, because sometimes riders' feedback is all different, avenues, and trying to, with the time we have, trying to get the bike as good as you can, getting everybody on the wavelength and then having a good team atmosphere, which, I was super lucky with my teams, and that's what I thought was the most important thing with the team. They're super happy. They think everybody says it's their favorite team they've been on just from the environment. And yeah, it's been a great start of the year. I mean, just like you were saying, did lead the championship for most of it. Now we're trailing. But to build everything with 3 riders, a full team, when we really started, November 1st of last year, it was a tough ask, and there was a lot of people to thank to do it. It obviously wasn't just me. I mean, there's so many people that made it happen. I think a lot of people didn't think we were going to be able to quite get it done, in the way we did. And then, to have some of the success we've had this year, it's been great. Obviously, I've never shied around the fact that anytime I go to a race or we go to a race as a team, we want to win. That's it. But it doesn't happen all the time, and we all know that, but that is the goal every time we show up, is to win the race with any riders we have. So, I think things have been going so far, pretty good this year.
Now, I don't know why I feel this way, but I was actually surprised, and I've been surprised by Kayla before, so you think I would know better, and not to be surprised anymore because of what she's obviously capable of.
Yep.
But at the Ridge, I mean, that was just like, she was there. I mean, it wasn't a light switch from where she was because she's built up a bit. It's been a slower. She's kind of thrown in the deep end, right? And I think she's adapted so well. Has she surprised you?
Honestly, not really. I was super happy for her, at Brainerd starting. That's when it kind of clicked a little bit. And then obviously at Ridge, everybody knows in the rain she's as fast as anybody or the one to beat. But, first year on a super sport bike, bikes are heavier. We've been working starting last year on training and trying to get her stronger in the area she needs to be. And what I think, Ridge did, well, starting back at Brainerd, that was her first time that she, in the dry, had a pretty strong qualifying run and didn't have to try to ride her, way through the race. And then they kind of pushed her around a little bit at Brainerd in the first couple laps. And then at the Ridge, she likes that track a lot. She qualified really well there. And then, I just told her before the first race, I said, it's spitting a little bit of rain, which I think also some people maybe saw that result. It might have been because it was spitting rain and people were nervous. But I told her, I was like, listen, unless it starts coming down with this many bikes on the track in the heat, it takes a lot to slow down. So I said, just roll with it, and just go. And I said, don't let them push you around. I said, ride it, like it's a junior cup race. And when you see a gap, go for it. I said, don't do anything crazy, but I said, set your deal right now. And those first couple races, I mean, she threw it down where she didn't do anything over aggressive, but I think she let it be known that, hey, I'm not just a girl y'all are racing, and I'm not going to go over the line, but also, you ain't going to push me around either, and she did a real good job with that. Had a strong race on Saturday, finished third. And then in the fully dry race on Sunday, I was hoping she could back it up, and I knew her times were strong. And if you watch in the race, I mean, besides PJ going out with that crash, I mean, she was behind, Mesa, Scott, and Jake Lewis. And she had to pass all of them. Mm-hmm. And she passed every single one of them on the brakes, not in a straight line from a draft. So, I mean, she did everything right. She rode, her race. And I told her, I said, listen, the race is 23 minutes, 24 minutes, max 25. I was like, you can suffer like a dog, for 25 minutes. I said, just don't get complacent. Keep charging. If you get behind somebody, don't just kind of wait. If I said, keep going forward, and keep plugging away. And she did. So, I mean, that was a really good weekend for her confidence. It's not always going to be like that, right, at every track. But what I told her, I said, listen, how you felt on the bike and how you pushed the bike and how it worked, which usually when you're close to the edge, you have the most feel out of the bike because it's moving around and you can feel what it's doing. So I said, let that translate to all these tracks. I said, if you come in and let's just pretend you're 1.3 off of PJ and you're not super happy with the bike, that's when you got to put it on yourself and maybe, okay, I've got to ride the thing harder, or the track might be green, and that's something that I'd learned back a long time racing with House was we'd come in and we'd be a second and a half off the pace. I'd see, another teammate, let's change, half a rate in the fork spring. It's like, no, we're not at the pace that we're going to be at. Don't change the bike. I mean, you're just wasting time. So, I just want her to lock that in of knowing how hard she rode the bike, how well it worked, and then just letting it come to other tracks like that. But it's not always going to be, a fairy tale, double podium for her. But what we did see was that when she's comfortable on the bike and she knows the track, where her level is. And what was she, 4 or 5 days after turning 17?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where you see what she can do. And she's going to do it more often, but you're going to have some weekends that aren't as good as others, and that's just the way it is.
She also told us in the press conference that she's got the motorcycle to the point where she can just make little changes instead of these wholesale changes where she can get lost.
Yeah.
And that's got to be a good thing going forward because, as you know, that's the ultimate is when you can find that little thing where you're just making little tweaks.
Yeah. Nowadays we have all the data on the Supersport bike, so you can really kind of fine tune it and nitpick stuff. But in the grand scheme of things, a Supersport bike, when you have a very good baseline, you should realistically be within 3% left or right. You shouldn't be changing, it shouldn't be a full spring change and lower in the front 5 mil. It should be like 2 mil and a couple clicks here and a couple, if you're starting to change the geometry of the motorcycle like a super bike, that's when you're starting to look at everything.
Right.
But a super sport bike, I've always believed that, when you get a very good baseline, you should be staying in that window. And she's got a good setup. And again, she knows what it feels like to ride it more or less on the limit. And let's just, now we come to Laguna and try to keep that pace going.
Okay, I've got to ask you. Sorry, Sean.
That's all right.
I'm hogging, but
that's okay.
I've got to ask you about the PJ thing and Sculpts.
Yeah.
And let's put Ben Spies in both of those guys' position.
Mm-hmm.
What would have been the best thing for what was the best outcome to happen there?
So again, this is constructive criticism because I've been a fan of the way Matt's riding. He's been riding awesome. The bike's working great, without a doubt. So. But in the same time, nobody's perfect, in the race, and I made mistakes, and people are going to make mistakes. But, for me, I was frustrated because we lost points. I was frustrated because, the lap before in the same corner, kind of almost got into the back of PJ and almost hit him. Mm-hmm. And then 2 corners later, he outbraked him from 8 bike lengths back and kind of completely blew the apex of the corner, and PJ had to wait so they wouldn't hit. And then the next lap, he got into him, and PJ being a racer, he knows he's there. So he had protected the inside like really big time. And the way that angle of the corner was, you could still kind of have a go, but it doesn't mean you're going to make the apex. And Schultz, he said, I'm going for it. And he went up the inside. As soon as PJ saw him, he lifted, as much as he could, but it still wasn't enough not to get hit. And Matt was off the apex by about 4 feet, if you look at it, so he didn't mean to take him out. I know he didn't want to do it, but the way that I looked at it is PJ was a sitting duck at that point. If you watch the 2 laps before that, his rear tire compared to Schultz, he was spinning everywhere. Schultz was a half a second a lap quicker, and he could have made a pass 5 to 6 turns later really easy. And PJ was content with second. We knew that we were basically going to get second at that point, but it was just, I think he got a little impatient, and it was a bit too tight of a pass, But in the same time, going back saying all that, I give the dude credit. He's been riding unbelievable, and they've got the bike working great. He ran him down the whole race. He chipped at it, and then the last 3 laps, he really caught him. And it just, it sucks that we didn't get to leave and at least have second place in points. Because, again, I feel if he would have waited till turn 6 and 7 on the last lap, it's the last lap, so you're starting to panic. You want to get that pass done. But to me, it was just a little bit of impatient, and it didn't have to happen. But, things like that are going to happen again. So It's just the way it is.
One of the things about that I wondered, so it was originally called a racing incident, and then there was a protest, and then it was deemed, 3 seconds. I don't know how they determined that, but it was almost like a moot point. It's like,
that was my complaint. Yeah.
Okay, because did you guys even think, Kayla could win this race? Did that come up at all?
Well, no. Again, my whole thing with that is it's kind of like, why enforce a penalty that has 0 repercussions?
Right.
Right. And when you look at the races, usually, besides, I believe, Road America, the gap's always been more than 3 seconds. To third or fourth or whatever it is. So, it's at least they set a precedent for it. And again, it was more, if it was just the one thing, it's kind of, you can look at it as a racing deal, but when you watch the lap before and those couple moves, they were lunges at best. And it was just kind of like, man, you've got the pace to win. You definitely have it. So just let's make it happen a little bit cleaner. But again, I'm not, like I said, it's constructive criticism because I give him a lot of credit on how he's been riding.
Yeah.
He's been riding great, but I feel with the pace he had at that part of the race, he could have made it a lot cleaner and a lot easier. But.
So we weren't there, but it sounds like in the course of that protest, you guys looked at some video.
Yep.
Did you look at what led up to that? Were you looking at some of the things you were talking? So a lot of that came into consideration.
Yep.
Then it sounds like. Okay.
Yeah, and again, it's more that PJ had protected the inside, so he was already moved over on the track. He had just got passed by him, so he knows he's there.
Yeah,
and it's 2 laps to go, so he's doing everything he can. But it's just, and again, like I guess the bigger point was as soon as PJ saw the front wheel, he stood the bike up 20 degrees, but it still wasn't enough to get his arm taken off the handlebar and wiped out. So
yeah.
Again, there's been way worse crashes. I know it wasn't an intentional, dirty move, but it was forced.
Yeah.
Put it that way. And we didn't have the chance. Nothing PJ could have done different would have got him out of that situation where he could have finished second in, points. So that was the frustrating part. But again, it's racing. Things like that happen. It's going to happen again.
Yep.
And you just move on for it. But it's unfortunate because, like I said, if we would have left and we had 20 points in second place, we were fine with that.
So, sorry, I got to ask him this one thing, Paul. This is a tough one, but you have a pretty good memory of what you did when you raced. Can you remember ever being in a situation like that and on either side of that situation?
No, I never got taken out and I never took anybody out. I plenty bumping and moving people over and stuff like that 100%, but that always comes down to the geometry and apexes of a turn on how you can do that. Certain kind of corners that tighten back up in the end, like a decreasing, radius that's the second apex of a turn. Yeah, it's super easy to go up the inside of somebody and it's super easy to get ahead of them. but that doesn't mean the trajectory of your line, where it's going, doesn't wipe that person out.
Right.
So that's always how it goes. But no, I mean, there was one point where Matt outbraked me. He got in there too hot. He was banging up the inside of me. I was leaning on him, and I had to run off the track. And, he didn't mean to, because at that point we were in as hot as you could be. We were just trying to stop the damn things, but I ran off the track. Then 4 races later, I did the same thing at Fontana. I committed to outbraking him on the brakes, and I was in as hot as I possibly could to stay on the track, and he just couldn't turn in, so we bumped, and he ran off the track. I slowed up, waited for him, and he waved, and he said, "Hey, keep going." It's the way it is. So, no, plenty of bumping, plenty of moving people around and stuff like that, but never, no, I mean, I took out one person in a practice session that I didn't mean to, but never in races like that.
So the good thing is, you're able to make up 5 points over the guy. If you win 4 races and he gets second 4 times, you're back to where you want to be. So, I mean, it's not like the championship's over by any means.
No.
And there are other guys that are capable of getting up there and putting themselves in the mix as well. So it's a bummer from our standpoint, because the championship was so freaking good, like 1 or 2 points or whatever, but I know you have to feel like there's a good chance of that coming back.
Yeah, it's just the way the points are. It's just tough. I mean, because like you said, I mean, he can win a couple, finish second, but we've got 8 races left. Matt could win 3, and then we could win the rest of them, and it is what it is. It's hard to make up points. Like with the structure. Now we have at least 2 races, so it helps out. But it is what it is. Like I said, at the end of the day, I mean, I hadn't talked with Matt, but I've talked with the other team about just what we saw, and we all agree with it. I mean, it wasn't a dirty takeout move. No, it wasn't. But again, it's just from our side, it was a little bit forced, and that's just the way it is.
Now, there's a lot of guys that have had good racing careers, and they struggle making that transition to being a rider coach or being a team manager, or in your case, what you call a
team mascot.
Team mascot.
Yeah.
Have you struggled with that at all? Is that based? It's probably a lot of it's based on the guys you're working with, or in this case, guy and girl that you're working with, as to how willing they are to listen. Or
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I learned is it's more stressful than racing. Because there's more things out of my control that's part of, our team. With me, it was just, I trained as hard as I could. I rode the bike as hard as I could, and my racecraft was as good as I could make it. That was it. There wasn't really anything to worry about. So now you're thinking about, this bike had a little bit of this going on, this one, trying to make the packages better. You got 3 riders. I can't do anything to help them, really, once they're on the track. So there's just a lot more moving parts that again, I'm not in control of. So I've had to, learn to deal with. I think I get more nervous for their races than when I did. I had adrenaline, but I wasn't nervous.
Right. Well, you had control of what you were doing.
Yeah. So that's sometimes that's a difference, in it. And then just, learning the riders, PJ, we work really well together. In the very beginning, it was kind of learning each other and learning him, and him, having some trust in me too. And then same thing with Corey and Kayla. Kayla had already kind of helped with a little bit behind the scenes the last couple of years. But again, my whole thing, it's not to talk with them and say, hey, you should sit on the bike like this, or you should do this. It's more just trying to, where I can hear them having weaknesses, or just try to make that better, try to figure out different scenarios. And, like with a couple of them last race, I was telling them, like, hey, when you're going into these types of corners, not every type of corner, because some is like a fast flowing corner, but I said, rear brake, when you're straight up and down on the brakes, I was like, don't touch it. I was like, there's no need to, because if you're braking at maximum brake pressure with the front end and the rear tire's barely on the ground, if you touch the rear brake, it's going to mess everything up. Now, once you start turning in and you start to actually release the front brake, if you want to start with your Band-Aid getting on your rear brake to kind of help slow the bike down and stuff, that's all fine. But I was like, if I see you backing in the bike because you're touching the rear brake, I said, no, there's no sense in it. I said, the rear tire should either be off the ground or it should be backing in from engine brake because you're braking so tough. I was like, you don't see Top Rack backing it in because his foot's on the rear brake. He's braking that hard. So that's probably the only thing with actual, riding that I've kind of talked with them about. And then the rest of it is just listening to them and trying to figure out how to make the bike and everything work around how they ride. Because I had a weird riding style when I grew up, and everybody was like, elbows this, and now everybody does it.
Right.
Like that's kind of, everybody leans off the inside, and that's kind of the new style. But so it's not always about how you sit on the bike and what you're doing. It's just being comfortable and getting the maximum out of what you're doing on it.
I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier. So this idea of passing people on the gas versus passing people under the brakes. Can you explain that to the fans? Sounds like passing under the brakes is a lot harder.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Talk about
it.
It
takes a lot more talent. It's, passing somebody on a straightaway. And sometimes you use a straightaway to set up for the brakes, but pretty much anybody, they can come out of a corner and you can get behind somebody and you can pass them midway down the straightaway and make a pass. And that's, yes, it has something to do with the drive off the corner, your tuck position, how you use the draft and how you pull out. But when you're behind somebody, clearly, when you let off the brakes and you hit the brakes and then you pass them in that short zone for the turn, it just takes a lot more talent. And usually what we see is some of the riders that aren't as good, or some of the lighter riders, they make their passes more at the midway part on the straightaway, and you see your bigger guys, like even when it was Aaron Yates, riding the 600, he's never passing one person on the straightaway. Neither probably is Ashton Yates. I mean, they have to make the passes in the most difficult spot. And it was just good to see Kayla, because there's no excuses of, oh, her bike's fast. And our bikes aren't the fastest in any of the trap speeds. So, she's making the passes where it's the hardest way to do it. And that's good to see.
Perfect.
When
Hold on. We're going to start stop. We're going to start stop the recording.
Okay, we can go a little longer though, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Another 20, whatever you want.
Okay, because I definitely got a couple more I want to ask. So, okay. So Ben, I don't think you knew I was going to ask you this, but I want to bring this up. Well, you and I have had this conversation about the lower age groups of MotoAmerica, Junior Cup. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten a chance to talk to you about what we're doing with the North America Talent Cup and this whole thing with the Kramer bike and the KTM engine. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's the first step to what we need to be doing to get, if we switch the conversation to having competitive Americans in Europe, that's what it is. And it's just, because years ago, if you look at all the people that raced in GPs when they came up, Kenny Jr., Colin, Nicky, me, Hopkins, everybody rode 125s and 250s. And what you learn on a 125 and 250 is the 125's got pretty much the most corner speed of any bike out there. Then you get on a 250, they're fractionally slower, but they have more power. You get on a 600, slower in the corner, more power. That's the way it moves up. And now, when you're riding like the Twins bikes or a Ninja 400 type bike, they don't handle as good as a 600 does. And you're not learning the maximum grip level, the maximum rigidity, corner speed, geometry through the corners because of those bikes and how they do it. From a young age, and it makes a big difference on, if you're raised on that, then you go to Superbike and then you try to go over to GP because it's a completely different platform. And so I think it's important. And again, that's what I just feel one of the biggest changes was that, because if you look at Asia and you look at Europe, they still do the same thing. And, I've said this before, and I might have said this on our last podcast, but the way I've been looking at it is, for the last 8 years, you can't take your top 5 best Americans that are raised on XR80s and XR100s, put them on a plane, take them to Europe, and then give them a CR80 and a CR125. They have no clue what the level can do because they've been so far back. They've been handicapped, in their elementary school. They didn't learn all the stuff that everybody else did. So I think that's a very important thing when we're having the conversation about how can we get fast Americans, in Europe. So I think it's a very beneficial thing and the start of, what we need to do to kind of get back to where we need to be.
So let me give you this analogy. You are in a multi-language or two languages in your family. You've got an Italian wife. We just talked about this. Your kids probably learn Italian. Kids learn better when they're younger.
Yeah.
Do you think that's part of it with this idea too? Is if you get them started on these kind of bikes, they're going to learn better because they're just like absolute sponges when they're kids. And if they learn how to ride a proper bike, it's going to help them all the way down the road.
I mean, it's common sense. I mean, that's just the way it works. I mean, if you put a kid on a Moto3 bike for a full season, and then he gets on a let's just call it a twins bike or a Ninja 400, he's going to ride the crap out of that bike. If he gets on a Ninja 400 or whatever it is for his first bike, and then he gets on a Moto3 bike a year after, he's going to be trying to figure out what the thing can do, because he has no clue the limit that it actually has, which is way up here.
Yeah.
So I just feel like that's the major thing, that's been missing the last few years. Because again, you look over in Japan, you look in Malaysia, you look in Europe, Spain, Italy, all those places, they're still doing the same thing. The elementary school for the kids is still the same. We just kind of went away from that.
And also, it's like if you learn to ride those bikes and you don't have a goal of going to Europe, it's still going to make you a better supersport rider.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
So it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah. And then there's the other, conversation. We start talking about Top Rack going to MotoGP kind of thing, which I don't think, is going to happen, but there's a lot of rumors, and it has nothing. I've tried to tell people so many times, because I talked with him a lot about before he did the M1 test. And, he asked me for kind of some feedback, and I told him, I was like, man, you've been spending so many years now on a super sport bike, super stock, then super bike. I said, it has nothing to do with talent. I think he's honestly, if he's not the most talented person in the world, because you've seen all the stuff the dude does. I mean, he's unreal. He's definitely top 3, right. 100% of raw talent. But the difference in those platforms of a super bike and GP bike, they're so far apart. They're even further than when I rode them. But when I rode them compared to like in the 90s, they were light years apart on how you brake and how you let off the brake, corner entry, your lines, all the different stuff. So, it was like, you can go over there and you can struggle, or you can still win, in Superbike. And it has nothing to do with talent. And it's just the same thing. Like if you put Max Verstappen, the greatest F1 driver, put him in a NASCAR. Tell me how well he does.
Right.
Put Kyle Larson in an F1 in Verstappen's car. Tell me how well he does. It has nothing to do with talent. Right. I mean, it's because those cars are so different. So are the bikes, that you can't expect that. Has nothing to do with talent. It's literally the feel or the lack of feel that one or the other doesn't have. So, with Top Rack, I think that, it's the smartest move for him is probably just to win X amount of Superbike titles and build a legacy, because, he can go over to GP and he might have a race win. He might have a couple podiums, and then he might get kicked out after 4 years because of Moto2 kids that come up. Right. So,
All right, I got to ask you about 2009 for a minute. Couple things about it, before and after. Do you ever? Two things. I'm going to ask you both questions. Do you ever think back to that year and go, "How the hell did I win that championship in that 1 year?" Conversely, you were with Suzuki leading up to that 1 year with Yamaha. Mm-hmm. Did you go into that season with any inkling at all that you were going to win that championship, or you were going to do what you did? Did you surprise yourself?
Might not be the favorite question, but I mean, I 100% went in saying I was going to win it.
Is that just an attitude, or did you believe that? I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's an attitude at that point, but we had won 3 titles in a row.
On a different bike, though.
Yeah, and that Yamaha wasn't as good as my 08 Suzuki, I'll tell you that much. Mm-hmm. It had a really good front end on it, so I could feel everything, and I could ride around a lot of problems. But, I mean, yeah, back at that age, the age I was and the confidence I had from racing with Matt, I mean, I told the media and everybody that, yeah, we're going to try to do the best we can, and mm-hmm. no, I mean, 100% me and Tom went over there to win the title. I mean, that's what we wanted to do. We had the first test at Portugal at the end of '08. Yeah. And I rode Haga's Superbike that he raced the whole season on with his controls on it, rear sets, foot. I didn't change anything. And I think after like 10 laps, and I hadn't been to Portimao either, after 10 laps, we went a little bit quicker than he did in qualifying. Wow. And then the next day I rode the '09 bike, which was literally a stock engine with some Superbike chassis bits on it. I think we were fastest or second quickest. And this is a true story. I remember I pulled Houseworth and Massimo Marigali out to pit wall after we had done the test. We were just sitting there, and I said, listen, I said, it's going to take everything we got, you know, and y'all listening to Tom and me on how we want to approach stuff and go about it. But I said, we can. Then I'd seen the level of the riders, and I was like, I know we can do it. We for sure can do it. But then we obviously started running into a lot of problems. We had DNFs with the bike, and we were 88 points back at one part of the season. And we were trying to develop the bike at the same time because it was a brand new bike. And it got to the point where probably a third way into the season, you know, we were to test, and I just said, listen, I said, we have to stop throwing parts at this thing. I said, I need to set it up as good as I can with this package, and we can win on it. And then we'll work through some of the stuff. But I said, I just need horsepower, and then let me work with this thing, you know, because we were down a little bit on power. And they were good. I mean, they really listened to Tom. Julio Nava, he's Bautista's crew chief now. He was my data guy in '09, and he still tells me to this day that he learned the most out of any of his years racing, working with Tom, working with me on how we went about it, and how basically we would just make a plan and execute it and just do it. And so yeah, I mean, the short story is going into '09, I mean, I had every intention to win the title. You know, I knew it was going to be tough, learning the tracks and stuff like that. I mean, that wasn't easy, but yeah, I mean, we weren't going there to get second, you know, for sure.
And looking back at that now, do you ever think, wow, I won that whole in 2009? I mean, I know you remember a lot of what you're racing, but does it still amaze you, or do you feel kind of?
Yeah, I mean, nowadays, back then it didn't, because everything's always just going so fast.
Yeah.
You know, and you're thinking of the next year, and you're thinking of this and that and this. So at the time, you know, it didn't hit me how big of a deal was. I remember when we took the lead in Magny Coors with 2 races left, the team, we go out to dinner, teams, they're getting hammered. They're having fun. Like, I was like,
too soon.
I'm like, y'all are having a lot of fun. And then Mayo said, yeah, but Ben, you know, we've never led the world championship.
Wow.
And I was like, what? I was like, you've never led it? I said, y'all have never won it? And I didn't know that.
Wow.
I didn't know that going into the season, that they had never won a title or led the championship. So
crazy.
Then there was more pressure that came on it with that. But yeah, no, it was, that was a great year. And then now when I look back at it and you think about all the tracks that we had to learn, switching from the bike manufacturer, electronics, you know, suspension, tires, everything was different. Yeah, it'd be tough to do it again, you know, and it's, that's what definitely I'm proud of, and proud of the team, proud of Tom. I mean, yeah, we did the riding part, but there's a whole lot of people involved to make it happen. And again, Mayo Marigali was, me and him are like brothers still. He made my living in Italy, and he was able to basically babysit me where I was comfortable. And even Alpine stars like Gabriella that owns it. There was one of my real good friends, Alec. You know Alec, and
Alec Dari.
He was working at A-Stars, and basically Gab said, okay, well, we're going to fly Alec with you to all the races, so you're just comfortable, you know. So they allowed me to keep that core group of people, and make it where I was comfortable and I could just go out and kind of do the job.
Okay. So your advice to Top Rack would be to stay and build a legacy. Looking back at it, do you have any regrets that you didn't listen to what advice you would give him and stay in World Superbike?
I mean, yeah, yes and no.
I mean, you're obviously a lot younger at the time. So
yeah. And it's, Honestly, I probably still, I mean, if I was going to make the decision now, I might still make the same decision, but I might have gone back sooner. I'm not sure. Because what a lot of people don't realize is actually in 2014, I was going to be back in World Superbike. My Ducati deal that I signed was 1 year with Pramac, and then the next year I was teammates with Chaz in World Superbike. So a lot of people didn't know that. So I was headed back. And it goes back to speaking with Johnny Ray about it too. We talked just lightly on it. And again, these guys are super talented, but the way that I kind of looked at it, and when I look at the level that it is now of Martin and Bagnaia and everybody, and the way that their styles are molded to those bikes, I'm not saying Top Rat can't go over there and do well. I'm not saying he can't win a race. Can he go over there and beat those guys week in and week out? I don't think so. And it's not because of his talent. It has nothing to do with that. I mean, and when I look at it, I kind of think, well, you can have a couple okay years, 2 to 4 okay years. And then with like the Moto2 kids, the Acostas and Aldegay and all those, like you're going to slowly kind of get whittled back down and then you're going to be out. And is winning 1 or 2 GP races, having 5 or 6 podiums, is that better than having 5 to 6 World Superbike titles? I don't think so.
Right.
But for me, I still look at it at the end of the day, like even because the GP career I had wasn't bad. It wasn't great. But could I stayed in World Superbike and won 2 to 3 or 4 more titles? I mean, possibly. But present day, would that change my life at all? No.
I mean, you look like you could still be winning them.
No.
Except for the shoulder thing, right?
I'm not. I haven't been riding at all. Everybody, they keep wanting me to get back on one of these team bikes. I'm like, it's never as good as it once was.
No.
So I don't think I'll be doing that. But yeah, just like for me, I just look at it like even if I had a few more titles in World Superbike, it doesn't, for me and my family and my current life, doesn't change anything.
Right.
But yes, I do have hindsight, from all that.
I want to ask you about, you touched on this a little bit earlier in 2009, even when you were kind of stopped throwing parts of the bike, just let me ride it. So you have raced some cars, maybe now that you're doing this, not as much as you had been before, but when you ride a motorcycle and you can affect so much of what that bike is doing on the track and you can in a car, is that frustrating?
Yeah, no, I that's what I was talking with Graham about. Like, it's not claustrophobic, but it's really, well, first of all, for some reason, I feel still more safe on a bike.
Yeah.
Even though I'm strapped in with a roll cage in a car. And then, with the car, a lot of stuff's very similar, a lot of lines, a lot of just how you approach stuff. Passing can be a little bit different, running two lanes to the next corner to be on the inside and a lot of different stuff. So passing's a little bit different. But yeah, for me, just like braking, when the car gets a little upset or whatever it is, like I want to be able to help it, with my body, but 170 pounds.
Doesn't even know you're there.
No, it's not doing anything. So that's the one thing I've struggled in, is just being locked in and not being able to move. But, it's not bad. I enjoy it.
That brings me to one of my final questions anyways, is Graham and the Rahals have to be really pleased with how the season's developed and how the team looks and the amount of media the team's getting, things like that. Is that accurate? Are they happy?
Yeah. No, Graham, unfortunately, his schedule, he's wide open. I mean, with all the business stuff he's got going on, plus the IndyCar schedule, it's hard for him to make the races. And, he made Brainerd, which I told him, I was like, it'd be nice to, other ones. But but he went to Brainerd, and then I believe he'll be at Ohio. But, if he could be here, or Coda at some other races, I think he'd like it even more. But obviously he sees the results. He's super happy with it. When he was at Brainerd, seeing the pit set up and how everything is, I mean, he likes it, so he's really happy with it.
Good.
The only one I've got left, and I don't think you're going to answer it, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Okay.
No, it's really about next year, though. I mean, obviously we know Kayla, okay, she just turned 17. She's not going to turn 18 until most of the way through next year. So she's not going to be racing Superbike next year. No. But, the intention of that team is, I'm sure, to at some point move up to Superbike. There are 2 other riders, that were in Superbike. Is that the plan for next year? Is it too early to say?
It's a bit too early. It's just, there's a lot of moving parts right now that, you know, when you're thinking about not wasting money or not just spending it to spend it, we've got to be, you know, conscious about bikes that change, you know, and rules that also might change too, you know, after that. And there's a whole lot of rumors and stuff going around on what the future Superbike class looks like, and not just here, but World Superbike, just a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of moving parts right now on that. We would like to, you know, at least have one Superbike next year for sure, but it's 100% not been decided. But yeah, we're working on that. I think in the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll kind of have a direction on if we're going to do that or not. And then go from there. But like I said, there's more than one kind of ball in the air that I'm trying to get more data about, trying to ask more questions to you know, some people overseas, and just kind of, you know, figuring that out.
Fair enough. You'll let us know first.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Thank you. All right, I'm good now.
Yep.
Thanks, Ben, for being on. This is great.
Awesome. Yeah,
Thank you.
No problem.